Okay, Christopher Peak's back here today with Dallas Terrell. He is an author who just finished his first book, Who Stole Uncle Tom and Why Does It Matter? And it's on line right now and available in local bookstores. Dallas, how are you, my man?
I am doing well. Here's the book right here. Who Kidnapped Uncle Tom and Why It Matters.
Oh, I still messed it up, didn't I?
Who Kidnapped Uncle Tom and Why It Matters. So that's book number one. And then book number two is Meditations from the Cabin. And that's a smaller book, a devotional book. That's Meditations from the Cabin.
So are both of them available now?
Yes, sir. Both of them are available.
And they're available online. What website do people go to?
They can go to Amazon, or they can go Barnes and Noble, or they can go to Salem Books. Probably Amazon and Barnes and Noble would probably be the easiest.
And I think you said you have them in some local bookstores. Do you know which one those are?
Yeah, there'll be local stores up here. One's called Blue Apple bookstores in Madison, Alabama. And the other one's called Snail on the Wall, which is in Huntsville. Those are the only two independent bookstores still left here in town.
Okay, so what drew you to this particular topic?
Well, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, born 1963, and I was raised by a widowed mother. My father died when I was 3 in a car accident, and she was very active in conservative politics. Living in St. Louis, being involved, for a Black woman to be involved in conservative politics, you kind of stick out like a sore thumb because St. Louis is a very liberal city. So her being involved with these particular things, as a young boy, I would hear people call her and her friends names every time there was an election cycle. They would destroy her signs in the yard, they would write things in the yard, and I kept seeing Uncle Tom written down and hearing people drive by and honk their horns and say Uncle Tom or other what I call plantation era-based names at her or her friends who may have been sitting out on the porch with her. So as a young boy, say 9, 10, 11 years old, I would ask her, what's up with this Uncle Tom? Who is Uncle Tom? Why are they calling you Uncle Tom? And she basically just said, well, it's out of ignorance. Don't worry about it. But it persisted. And eventually, what she usually did with me when I kept asking questions, she'd give me a book to read. So she went out and got a book about Uncle Tom's Cabin, kind of a synopsis of it, and who the author was, and what was going on at the time that she wrote the book in 1852. So that was my first encounter with it. Next encounter came during my high school years. I cut my teeth as far as being able to understand politics a little better is during the Reagan years. I graduated from high school in 1981. So with Reagan, he brought a lot of individuals into voting conservatism, or at least individuals out of the closet, so to speak, who weren't typical Democrats. The one thing he said is that I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party left me. So seeing these minorities come over into, or at least become visible in the Republican Party, I started hearing those names again. So at that point, I went ahead and got me Uncle Tom's Cabin, the book myself, and I read through it. And then it just intrigued me on the spiritual side of Uncle Tom's Cabin, that Uncle Tom was basically depicted in the person of Jesus Christ. When you read the book and you see how he responded to things that happened to him that were unfortunate, they were unfair, he basically quoted scripture. And of course, in the book, Uncle Tom can't read. He's a slave, he can't read, but he has a great memory. And he's taught how to read by the children of his slave master, and they become very close. So Uncle Tom in Harriet Beecher Story's book really intrigued me because of that. Me being a follower of Christ, I was drawn to that. And I began to wonder, why would individuals want to vilify someone who's depicted in the place of Christ, and it's about the abolition of slavery. So that's where I was, and then I went off to college. Um, got involved in some campus conservatism stuff. Didn't hear it much on the college campus. It's probably because I played football and I was a pretty big guy, so nobody really called me that name, at least to my face. And there was no social media then. So back then, if you was going to talk to somebody, you couldn't hide behind a keyboard and say something to them. So that's kind of where I was. And then the next episode was during the Clarence Thomas hearings. I don't know if you remember that, but
Oh yeah.
Clarence Thomas was called all types of things on national television by individuals who should have known better. And that intrigued me again because these are individuals who are supposed to be educated, they have degrees. Um, they should know when it comes to Uncle Tom's Cabin that if they call someone that as an insult, they should be smart enough to know that what they actually are doing are insulting themselves and telling the world that, hey, I've never read this book, but I seem to be an authority on who I can call Uncle Tom. And like I said, there was some other names called him by both black and white politicians and TV pundits. And so that kind of set me on a crusade at that particular point, is that anytime I heard someone call someone Uncle Tom, I says, hey, don't get upset about it. Use it as a teaching opportunity. Ask the person, or first of all, thank the person that they're basically giving you a compliment, and be able to say, hey, I appreciate the compliment you've given me, but it's obvious to me that you have not read Uncle Tom's Cabin. Would you be interested in reading that book along with me? And then we can discuss these issues without calling someone names or insults. So that usually, shuts the person up real quick, because they never, they expect you to come back and argue with them about something that they disagree with politically. But when you come at them on that vein where you're talking to them on facts and you're not dealing with emotions, um, then you expose what their real intentions are, and that's to shut down substantive conversation because they don't have anything substantive to say.
So you're disempowering that person.
Exactly.
Somebody said the other day, there was a former black politician I'm friends with, and me and him kind of got back and forth because he said Clarence Thomas, he was blasting the president for going away from DEI policies that he said, that he supported, but then he was blasting Clarence Thomas as being a DEI affirmative action hire. And I'm like, wait a second, isn't that, aren't you going against what you're mad at Clarence Thomas because he doesn't fit the liberal mold that you want? Is that the problem here?
Yeah, so that was the thing that intrigued me, because Clarence Thomas was going to be the second black Supreme Court justice in the United States. And I would think, even if a person disagreed with him on the other side, that would be a big deal. He was replacing Thurgood Marshall, who was the first one. And I would think that would have been a very big deal to have someone else who's black to be on the Supreme Court as a justice. But individuals just would not let that go because he was a conservative. And the fact that his name was Tom or Thomas, that even made it so more so. So he referred to what was going on, and this is kind of a historical thing, it's probably on YouTube, that this was like a high-tech lynching, what was going on. And it's quite interesting that our former President Biden, who was a senator at the time, was very, I would say, ignorant when it came to things that he said opposing the nomination. But, they're just reading cue cards when they're doing that, because they're all saying the same thing. No one has an original thought, and they don't recognize, it's kind of like when you're cheating off somebody growing up. You want to make sure you don't write the answer exactly the way someone else wrote it. You want to put your own words in a little bit, but these individuals don't have the sense even to do that. So, so there I was at that particular time as a young man, seeing the Clarence Thomas thing. And so I just kind of began to pay attention. Again, like I said, I was raised in a conservative home. And someone asked me, but how did that happen? You know, because sometimes individuals may be raised in a conservative home, but their children may turn out to be, you know, not conservative. And I said, well, probably the biggest thing that turned me away from believing in the liberal utopia that's usually spelled out in blue cities, where they says, okay, if we can just get a black mayor, black council people, a black police chief, a black blah, 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 or sometimes it's a female black, that everything will be perfect. But when you look at these blue cities, where you have all those individuals who, quote unquote, they are the right color, so many of those cities are unlivable. Those people who can move out, they move out to the suburb areas. And those people who can't, they're stuck. And you see that generationally happen. And in St. Louis, you know, as far as my whole life, I don't know when I would say it probably happened after with the New Deal, that blacks came into voting for Democrats in the city of St. Louis. Like I said, I was born in '63, so it had been that way all my life. And then I would see people leave the city, and of course they called it white flight. You know, they have to put some type of ethnic bad marker on it, but basically it came to that it was economic flight. If you could do better, you did. And to try to make people feel guilty about trying to do better is another Marxist shutdown to obscure the realness of what's happening.
What are your thoughts about when you talk about the blue cities and the Democrats, when you point out to people that, hey, here's crimes being committed here? You know, you see white flight, you see black flight, you know, black people trying to get out of there for betterment.
Yeah.
What do you think when people cry, well, that's racist to say that?
Yeah. And again, that is, so one of the things that I'm saying in my book is that this uptick that we find today, really since Obama was president, everything that people disagree with on the left is racist, or it's homophobic, or it's misogynist. You know, these techniques are tried and true Marxist techniques in order to bring chaos and bring confusion and to bring conflict. Um, um, so one of the things I point out in my book is the historical aspect of that. And that's why the second part of my title says, and why it matters. Because what I'm pointing out is that the same spirit that had individuals saying negative stuff about Uncle Tom during the 1850s is the exact same spirit that you have when blacks started being using the term Uncle Tom, and again, other plantation, there's a whole list of other plantation-based names that individuals would call people when they disagree with them politically. So things I'm showing, I'm chronicling that the history in the United States of how that happened, to be able to show young people, and I say I'm 60, but to be able to show people, I would say under 40 years old, that BLM is not something new. It's just a reiteration of something that's happened in the past, and it just has a new name on it. Critical race theory is not new. The name is new. However, the concept goes back many years. So I'm showing that kind of history because, you know, when you're growing up, when you see things happen, you think they're happening for the first time. And if you don't have a good historical upbringing and background, you know, you get all emotional and you have no historical context. So you know you want to do something, quote unquote, about bettering the social, you know, format of what you're growing up in. But if you understand that there's a pattern that's going on, and that there's groups of people who are using social unrest, they're using um, legitimate, I would say, issues in society, but they are turning them into crusades that have nothing to do with, say, social justice.
Is that the particular message you was wanting to convey in your book?
Yes, and then the second thing is that I want to invite individuals. I have a hashtag called Conversations That Matter. I want to invite individuals to be able to have conversations when they disagree with one another, and then be able to come back and have other conversations, as opposed to having conversations, and then it being cut off, and then individuals never have conversations again. They just have arguments all the time. So that's what I want to be able to do, is I can show a historical context and be able to show, okay, this continues to happen because we failed to learn from history. And if we want to change the narrative, if we want to see substantive things occur where transformative change happens in our cities, what we have to do is that we have to be proactive and get off this merry-go-round that I call plantation politics. And the reason I call it plantation politics, going back to slavery, the one thing that a evil and nefarious plantation owner feared is if the domestic slaves and the field slaves started having conversations together. Because as far as that master was concerned, they're conspiring to do something. So what that master would do is that he would implement different ways of bringing politics into his slave plantation. He would promote some and get jealousy going. He would float rumors. So there was distrust, so he could foment distrust between those slaves who worked close to the family in the house and those slaves who were in the field. And as long as he saw that, he was safe. But if there ever was a time that individuals were getting along, so I see that happening in politics. That if individuals,
yeah, that's what's going on today.
Yeah, so if individuals would have substantive conversations, I would think these career politicians would get very nervous. And that's why you have individuals that are fomenting extreme conversations, because they know they can just throw some red meat out there, and it can happen on both sides. It can, on however many sides we have, they just throw some red meat out there and they just see the dogs go after it. And then it takes the public's eyes off of what they're doing. And once something gets exposed, someone else is called a name. So that's what I'm challenging individuals, that don't fall for this stuff of calling each other people's names. Keep to the substance. Deal with what are the consequences of these individuals who put forth these different policies. Stop looking at personality. Stop looking at the color of their skin. Stop looking at their sexual preference. Stop looking at their gender. Look at what is the consequences of the policies that they are ascribing to, and then make sound, rational decisions that are not based on high emotions.
Touching on that, do you think there's going to be, or what kind of emotions do you think is going to be, and reactions are going to come out because of this book?
Well, initially, I want individuals who have a tendency to call people names, I want them to be angry. And the reason I want them to be angry, because all it does, it proves exactly what my premise is that individuals can get off the subject, but that does not help either side. Or put it like this, that does not help America. Maybe that's what I'm saying. The thing that helps them, is going to help America, is that we're called the United States of America. We're not called the Uniform States of America. We're called the United States of America. When the colonies became states, there were grave differences on different issues, but they had a common enemy, and that was the British. And they could come together and say, okay, we can form this because we do not want to deal with the crown. We don't want to deal with a monarch telling us what we can do and what we can't do. And that's what we have to be able to see today, is that if you don't want career politicians running your life and taxing you to the hilt, where you've got to work just to make ends meet, then you need to do something about it. So what I'm challenging people to do is that after elections are over, if your neighbor has a certain color sign in their yard and you have a different color sign, that you go walk across to your neighbor's yard, shake their hand and say, congratulations, your person won. Now let's keep their feet to the fire. But there's some issues that we have on this street right in front of our house that you and I and our other neighbors need to get together, and we need to work on solving those problems. The answer is not in Washington, D.C. The answer is not in Montgomery. The answer is not in with your city council. Your answer is in when citizens come together and address issues that are going on in their own neighborhood, whether it be with their child rearing, whether it be in their classrooms, whether it be in their churches, whether it be in their community forums, or whether it just be in how you communicate with one another. That's one of the things I'm offering suggestion to. I call those the pillars of society. And I see that when the social engineers of the critical theory individuals, they came up with this idea that in order to overcome democracy and Western civilization, it's not going to happen with bombs and guns. It's going to happen with a cultural revolution. So say we have to take a long walk, a long march through the culture and go after those things that are erected that keep the United States what the United States is. So they set out to subvert religion, entertainment, education, law, family, and that's what we have today. What's going on? You have all these different, what they're calling critical theories, and all there are is Marxism, neo-Marxism, that started in the 1920s and the 1930s with a group up at Princeton University in Columbia, and it's just different iterations of it that's happening today. And we have to wake up and understand what's being done to us. Otherwise, our children and our grandchildren are going to be talking about the same stuff after you and I are gone.
Do you think that's possible today when we see the left fomenting so much violence with attacking our police officers? We saw some ambushes the other day. Seems like the left will cancel somebody just because they have a disagreement. Where people on the right, we may not agree with what we say, but we can what you say, but we're not going to cancel you.
Well, based on the last election, yeah, I have hope. I set out writing this book in 2016 after Trump won because Trump brought in a lot of non-traditional conservative voters because of his background, in culture prior to him being president. One of the things that I saw as growing up I noticed that every Republican candidate or president was labeled as a racist, going all the way back to Reagan. I remember with Reagan, because each one of his names has 6 letters in it. They were saying he was 666.
I remember that.
So you had the Bushes that were labeled as racists. And the interesting thing I says, okay, how are they going to be able to put someone like Trump, who's hanging out with rap stars and athletes and NAACP people and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, how are they going to put him into being a racist? This was in 2000, when he first started running in 2000, when he won in 2016. And then slowly it began to happen. All disagreements disagreements have to do with race. And it just kept building on that and building on that. And I thought in 2016, okay, I need to write something, because what I'm seeing is something that continues to go on and we continue to fall on it. And the thing that happens, when you start approaching certain age barriers, certain age markers like 60, you start thinking, okay, I've got less time in front of me than I have behind me. So if I've got something to say, I need to say it. So that's when I set out starting to write it with the idea, if 2016 was like this, 2020 is going to be crazy. And of course, 2020 was crazy, but not the way we thought it was going to be crazy. So the book couldn't come out in 2020 because so much stuff was going on, printing presses, the publishers, nobody was at work. So I thought, okay, I'll just wait to 2024. And all that did was gave me more material to prove my point, because, there was a great uptick, with the 26 because of the, what happened with the George Floyd stuff and the BLM people being exposed as being straight up Marxists and with their behavior. Here's a group of individuals that decry white supremacy. And once they make money, where do they move their home? Where do they move their families to? Neighborhoods full of white people. No matter how they tried to spin it, they could not spin themselves out of that. So a lot of these groups, end up because they're based on fraud, it eventually comes to fruition. And the individuals that have been following these individuals, they get despondent because they were real believers. They got emotionally involved only to see that the same pride and arrogance that they talked about the other side having, they had it also. So, Chris, that's one of the things I saw was that when I look at the 19th century bigots who believed that Caucasians were superior, and they were anti-Uncle Tom, anti-abolitionists, they had a problem with pride. And the middle letter in pride is I. They had an I problem. Their focus was on themselves, building up themselves, and they would do what they would other people. So they would, it's kind of like in this town between Alabama and Auburn, folks. If someone's from Alabama and they hear someone's from Auburn, it's like there are others. It's like you've been othered right now. You're no longer an Alabama resident, you're an Auburn fan, or you're an Alabama fan. So I call that othering people. So these individuals in the 18th century, in the 19th century, that's what they had a problem with. But then you turn the page in the 20th century, in the early 1900s, now you've got pro-black power people who are turning around calling other blacks these same names that these individuals in the century before were calling blacks in order to dehumanize them and devalue them. So you begin to have two groups that were going, well, actually it was three groups that was going on in the early 1900s. You had the Industrial Revolution. You had the agricultural South after the Civil War and after Reconstruction. Individuals moving to the North because the Industrial Revolution, the Second Industrial Revolution was taking place. You had all kinds of ethnic groups coming from other countries who were moving to these cities to work in these factories. So say if you were going to open up a shoe factory in Philadelphia and you heard somewhere in a little town in Italy, there was a similar shoe factory making the same kind of shoes, you would send headhunters or brokers to that particular town and say, hey, we're going to open up this factory in Philadelphia and we want 100 families to come to Philadelphia. We have it marked out where you can live. You can have your own schools. You can have your own churches. You can have your own restaurants. So you begin to have this all over the Northeast and the Midwest, where you have these distinct pockets of ethnic groups. And at that point, it was something that was pretty positive because it was a big deal. If you wanted to see Italian culture or to have Italian food, you would go over to an area like in St. Louis, it was called the Hill. And that was something that was looked upon as positive. And there would be German areas, you would have French areas. So you would have these different areas. But the other thing that's happened is that you're having all these blacks come from the South who also are coming north. And what began to happen is that the northern blacks who lived in states that did not have slavery for longer periods of time, they didn't know anything about slavery because they never experienced it. Okay. So when those blacks started coming from the South who did not have the benefit of education, the blacks from the North looked down upon them. The blacks from the South, they wanted to be segregated because they did not trust white people. And you can understand why. They were born in the South. They were subject to all kinds of things, the Jim Crow things, which also were in the North. But the ones in the North, they wanted integration because they grew up around white people and they wanted to show white people we're just as good as you are. So having separate but equal stuff going on, there in the early 1900s, the people in the North was like, no, we don't want that. But the people from the South moving to the North saying, yeah, we want that. We don't want to be around white people. And then you had another interesting group that was in the North, and that was the West Indies and Caribbean heritage people of color. Slavery ended in those particular areas in 1930. The British abolished slavery in their colonies. The French, the other countries who had slave plantations in the West Indies, they abolished slavery. So you had these individuals who are Afro, Caribbean, sometimes Indian, individuals who were now moving to the United States in the 1930s and 1940s. Their children and grandchildren, at the turn of the century are now living in those areas. And they've had 2 generations of family members being in the North. Now, these individuals were highly influenced by the European slave owners or slave plantations that they were in. So if you was in like Jamaica, you had a very strong French, or Haiti, you had a very strong French. But if you're in other areas, you may have had a very strong British. And with that came different ideas about Christianity. So these blacks who had moved from the Caribbean areas and their children and grandchildren are now being born in the early 1900s, they were called pseudo blacks because they talked a little different. They were Anglican in their religious heritage. They ate different foods, and they didn't have anything in common besides skin color with indigenous blacks who were born in the United States. So you have all these different groups. And the point I'm making here is that when you have all these different groups, there is a possibility that eclectic community cultures can blend and teach something to one another. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity for those individuals who want to exploit and want to, they have a love for power, they will use these groups in order to build a power base, if that makes sense. So, so even in Birmingham, when you think about when the steel factories and the iron factories were really hopping, and you look at how the homes were built in certain areas of town, and you had certain people who worked at certain mills lived in a certain area of town, and that was their world. But you would have different ethnic groups who would possibly get in the better jobs in those steel mills. And sometimes it could be because family members, it could be because, if you had a cousin who was the foreman and you lived in the Italian area of Birmingham, then when it came to people getting those particular jobs, he may have picked people from his church, from his civic group, and people who he knew or she knew. And then other groups are saying, wait a minute, I've been here just as long. I should get an opportunity to apply for that particular job. So you begin to have certain jobs in certain industries that were held out for certain groups of people based on ethnic heritage, religion, whatever. So you begin to have these particular things happening. And what happened in the United States is that if you can get individuals, this is what the Marxists realize, is that if we can get into the means of production by organizing unions, then we can control things in the United States by just having strikes and riots, workplace riots. So that's what they set out to do. Individuals in the United States did, at that time in the early 1900s, did not know enough about communism to be able to point out and say, no, socialism is just another word for communism. Because you had a lot of people who were hurting because of these monopolies who were not taking care of their employees. They had long work hours, they had unsafe working conditions. It was all about making the money, working people into the dust. So the idea of unionizing was a positive idea. And this is what Marxism does. It takes an area that's a legitimate concern. It comes in with a veiled approach to solving the problem. But the whole time, what they're doing is that they're putting their people in position so that they can control the unions. So that's what began to happen. And it happened in the big time in the North. They would make sure that they could influence individuals who, again, who are greedy, so whether it be money, whether it be drugs, whether it be sex, they would get individuals in these compromising situations, and they would have something on them so that if the person did not agree with them in doing what they told them to do, they would expose them. So you had that with the different trade unions. and you had individuals who do not have the 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 wherewithal and the best interest of the workers themselves at hand. Um, so Chris, so what you basically had, you had all these groups, and what I'm saying in my book is that the reason why identity politics is not good for the public is because it empowers those individuals who want to exploit the political system for their own gain. And that's how we get career politicians who are corrupt, and then their children become politicians, they're corrupt, and their grandchildren become politicians. And even in our lifetime, Chris, you probably have seen that in different cities. You probably have seen it there in Birmingham. You probably have seen it in the little towns that are around. You have the same people seem to be getting elected all the time. And people continue to complain about problems, but they elect the exact same people. And we have to wake up to check out what's going on and do something about it. Otherwise, our grandchildren will be having the same arguments that we're having, that people had in the 60s, that people had in the 40s. And all the time, there's a group of bureaucrats and politicians who are making a career out of us arguing.
So in essence, we have like an elite ruling class that is keeping people divided, making it about race when it's really class warfare.
Yes, whether it be race, whether it be gender, whether it be um, uh, religion, um, anything that people can, you know, other people. So, you know, so say, Chris, say you went to school at Alabama. You may have blind spots toward people from Auburn that you may not be aware of it until somebody brings you aware of it. You may be someone who's Catholic and you have blind stuff toward Protestants and vice versa. Um, so what we got to be able to do is take a long look in the mirror and ask ourselves, okay, do I treat people different? Do I have a different attitude toward people, not based on their character, but is it based on something else that has nothing to do with who the person is in reality? So being able to take a long look in the mirror first and do that, and then say, okay, I need to clean up those areas. I need to stop reacting to people just because they're from blank blank, or just because they look like they're from certain places. You know, it's easy to want to put people all in a box and then try to control them. You know, in this country, we have a tendency to say people who speak Spanish are Latino. But when you look at the different countries where Spanish is spoken and the different cultures, some of those people don't have anything to do with one another besides the language. Okay.
Right.
You and I may have something. Okay. You and I may grow up in a rural area of Alabama that historically was very racist. But you and I go to school together. We play football together. We hang out together after school. You and I, who have different color skin, would have more in common than I would have with a black person from Oregon. However, because me and that black person from Oregon have the same color skin, it is assumed that we think alike, that we have the same interests in hand, and that we should vote for the same people based on our skin color. So what we have to be able to understand is that we cannot allow people to use non-character things to determine our choices when it comes to things that we value. And what we need to value is respecting one another as human beings and recognize that there's no such thing as multiple races of humans. There's only one human race. Lots of ethnicities, one human race. When they came up with the idea in the 1800s of calling people different races, that was an attempt to remove the biblical idea of creation. So you had to come up with a way to be able to put people on a scale of higher evolution. So those individuals who came up with this idea and codified it into science. And I tell people that if you someone who ascribes to evolution and natural selection, by definition, you are a racist, because that was the time when individuals start separating people and put them in various positions based on where they were from or what color their skin was. These individuals, when they first start off, they couldn't figure out what to even call the races of people. First, it was based on where they lived. When the Europeans started moving into other countries and other continents, they started seeing people who looked different from them. So them in their ignorance, thinking that the little area of, say, the continent of Africa that they were in, that everybody on that continent, from the north to the south to the east and the west, were all going to be called Africans based on geography. Now, the cultures in Africa are so vast. That's why you would have cultures fighting each other. That's why you would have people with the same color skin enslaving one another, because it had nothing to do with skin color. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were on the same continent. It had to do with power. It had to do with being able to control. So same thing happened in Asia. Same thing happened on other continents. So they started calling people based on the continent that they were born on or that they lived on. Now there's nothing scientific about that. But then we take it and we turn it into something like it's supposed to be something that's real. So once individuals from the European countries started going into different areas, they had a conundrum. What do we call all these people? So you come up with an idea like evolution that says there's a certain group of people who are the highest form on the scale, and there's certain people who are closest to the primates. And it just so happens that those individuals who are making those decisions, they put the people who they say are closer to the primates who look the least like them. So we turn around in science and accept that as true, not knowing that ascribing to that is the very definition of demeaning and devaluing someone based on skin color or where they were born or what their genetics are. And that is all bogus science. That's not real science. The social engineers in the 1800s came up with this idea in reading Darwin on how they could build society based on ethnic heritage and putting people in certain places and relegating people to other places. And when we buy into that, then we have all these problems, Chris. We have all these problems when we look at each other because we have different skin colors or we speak a different language or we have a different genetics, that somebody is of another race. And this whole point about Uncle Tom and about being a traitor to your race is all coming from pride. And that middle letter in pride is I. The middle letter in sin is I. So it all comes down to individuals having an I problem and not being able to understand the communities that they live in, and that they're individuals who have value just like they have value.
So this is very in depth. How long did your research take you?
Well, because this is something I've been interested in all my life, I didn't really see it as research. I just saw it as being interested in reading stuff. Now, the Darwinian stuff, I was very interested as a young person because of the militant Darwinian evolutionists were very militant against the church. And me growing up a Christian, those were fighting words because they would refer to people who believe in a religious or a divine hand in creation, as Bible thumpers, as Neanderthals, as people who were back in the 1600s. And then they're supposed to be the smart ones. And I took exception to that. I recall coming home from school one time as a kid and being upset. My grandma asked me what was wrong. And I said, it's because my teacher wants me to put down the test that we came from monkeys. And I don't believe we came from monkeys. And my grandmother, she looked at me and she says, I want you to go back to that school and ask that teacher, if as humans we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? And when she said that, I was thought, well, that's just kind of plain common sense. So I went back to school and asked my teacher that question. And this particular teacher was always making biting remarks about Christians and people who believe in any kind of religious or divine aspect of creation. He'd always make these little remarks. But after I asked him that question, at least the class that I was in, he stopped doing that because he knew he had somebody in there who was going to ask, who was going to call him on the stuff that he was saying. So, I guess I was a young radical when it came to wanting to point things out that I saw. And then as I got older, you see things that are on applications saying what race you are. I would always put human.
I started messing with people like that. Look, they put down, I put down European American.
Yeah, and see, and even that term right there is vague because Europe's a big place.
Yeah. So tell me, what was your writing schedule like? Did you write like whenever you felt like it, or did you allocate so much time a day, or how did you? Because you said it took you what 8-9 years to write this book.
Yeah, because my day job is that I'm a fitness person, so it's not like I had a whole lot of time to write, so, but I was interested in these things, so I read up on them. I would write down little notes because I wanted to be able to have conversations with people who ascribe to these particular ideas, and I wanted to have receipts, as we call it today. So when someone says, "Where'd you get that from?" or that's European whitewashed history. Where'd you get that from? And I would say, "Look this up. I want you to read it and then get back with me on it." So I always wanted to come back with facts, and I have a very strong hunger of reading. That's something my mother really endeared to me when I was younger. I was an only child, and I guess that's the way she can keep me quiet, is give me stuff to read. So reading was something I was very in tune to, looking at uh, source material, that came from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I was always intrigued about history. And so when I started reading about abolitionism, and how there were many Caucasians, many groups that risked their lives, lift their livelihood, their homes, their careers, their jobs, their businesses. They risked all those particular things fighting against slavery. And I always thought, why isn't that story told in dealing with abolitionists, that you have blacks and whites working together against something that was wrong? And for the most part, they didn't care who got the credit. And I see what's going on today, that's what's going to take. It's going to have to take individuals who come from different backgrounds, different economic classes, different educational backgrounds, coming together and saying, we refuse to be pitted against each other. Interesting thing happened during the early 1900s when you had that group of ex-slaves who became abolitionists, who were starting to die in the early 1900s. Your Booker T. Washington's, George Washington Carver, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. Those individuals all had a very strong Christian religious background and undergirding. But to the Marxists who were making their way into the United States in the early 1900s, they didn't like that because Marxism's atheist. So they began to prop up Black leaders who were more atheistic. They were not patriotic in the sense that they did not have a love for America. They wanted to change America. So they began to recruit these individuals, namely those Caribbean born or heritage individuals. So a lot of your early Black leaders in education and city administration, they were individuals who had a Caribbean heritage, West Indies heritage, because those individuals, when you start talking to them about workers unite around the world, their idea of America was not the same as someone who was born in Mississippi as a Black person, and the culture was so different. So when it came to those individuals who were born in Mississippi and they were Black and they were born into slavery, when the Civil War came, they had a desire to see the United States become what it was supposed to, and that is endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we have a common creator. We don't have a creator that created certain individuals different when it came to how they should be treated based on their ethnicity. Um, so these individuals begin to um, recruit blacks to turn against each other. And when anybody stepped out of line, they were called a traitor. And that trading word was Uncle Tom. So you had the W.E.D. Du Boises, and you had those northern blacks who got pushed to the front in leadership, and those from the south were pushed back. So Tuskegee Institute, those in the north were saying, we shouldn't be teaching individuals to be involved in agriculture because that's where we came from with slavery. So instead of saying we need both people who can build houses, who can do plumbing, who could grow food, who knew how to rotate crops, not only do we need that, but we need doctors, lawyers, we need people who can do administrative stuff. It became an either or thing. It became W.D. Du Bois or Booker T. Washington. And there was a fight in the public about whose side you was on. That is plantation politics. What would have happened if the forces who were behind W.D. Du Bois and the forces who were behind Booker T. Washington came together and supported one another? Because, Chris, when a doctor has a plumbing problem, he doesn't call another doctor.
Right.
Right. He calls a plumber. And that plumber can charge that doctor whatever he wants to fix that problem, and the doctor's going to pay it. So when it came to the quote unquote vocational skills, the practical skills, they got demoted as saying that's below the new black Negro who's coming in the early 1900s. The new black Negro is going to be someone who's going to be refined. He's going to be educated. He's going to be a doctor. He's going to be a lawyer. He's going to be an administrator. And they looked down upon those individuals that had those other skills. All that did was play into the conflict and the chaos that Marxism tries to propose. So when you ask about Dallas, do you see things getting better? Yes, I see things getting better because of what happened in the last election. People rose up and says, I'm not going to believe the media anymore. The media is not going to trick me into believing things that I can see right in front of me, and they're telling me it's different. They're telling me that we're not in inflation and I can't afford groceries. So these elitists are trying to tell us something that we know is wrong. So people rose up and they voted. So I think what the key is now is that those of us who had supported Trump, we reach out to individuals who voted differently and say, look, you may not like Trump, you may not like his personality, but you cannot deny the man loves America. You can't deny that. Now, you may not like the way he's doing it, but there's no doubt about he loves America and he wants America to be strong. So what we have to be able to do on the city level, on our community level, is what can we do? We can disagree on immigration, and that's fine. But in our individual cities, the idea is, what are you doing about it? So say, for instance, if you have a particular school that has a large population of Latino kids in there, kids whose Spanish is their first language and their parents don't speak English in the home. And say you're someone who really wants to help the immigrants in your town. Well, one of the ways you can do that is you can go to that school and say, hey, do you guys need help in being able to teach reading skills to these kids? You can go to the business community, these people who have businesses, and helping them establish their business where they're legitimate businesses so that they're getting paid just like someone else who's here is getting paid, and they're not getting taken advantage of just because they came from a different background or they speak a different language. So there's things, regardless of how you feel about what's happening at the border, that people can come together and make their city stronger and work together, that has to deal with immigration. Because if you help someone with their kids, it don't make no difference where they're from. The reason why they came to this country is because they wanted a better future for their children. So if you're someone who's out there and you're going to help their kid learn English, learn skills so that that kid can get a better education, get into a better schooling situation, whether it be vocational or whether it be a traditional school or go in the military, whatever it is, being able to show people that this is the land of opportunity and that we can disagree on particular things, but we don't have to fight one another because that makes us weak. And those individuals who are enemies of this country, they're like the plantation owner sitting back on his porch watching two slaves out there fight each other.
Touching on that, this last election, we've seen a record number of black males. I think almost 25% vote for Trump. I mean, even with black females, it was, I think Obama got like 97% of them. And, we've seen it drop. We've seen Hispanic males, Hispanic females. I mean, do you think that we've reached a point where the Democratic Party is fixing to be a minority party because people have woke up to this, that, hey, we're not listening to this anymore. The Republicans are not evil. The conservatism is common sense.
Yes, I mean, yeah, that is happening. And again, like I said, the key is that we can't just celebrate the fact that we won something. We have to take the opportunity to bring bridges across political lines because that's what's going to make America great. Not that this party is in power and that party is not in power. It's going to be individual citizens, regardless of how you vote. I believe there should be, if you're a minority or whatever you call yourself a minority, whether it be ethnic, whether it be gender, whether it be whatever, it is healthy to have people among your quote unquote group in both parties because somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. So what is happening with blacks in this country is that when you vote for a particular group, 90, 95%, that group does not have to compete for your vote. So once they get in office, they're not going to do anything for you. They're going to empower a few elites like them to have elected positions. Those individuals are going to move out of your neighborhood or they're going to move into a gated neighborhood, continue to get voted for every year that they run up for election. Look at Maxine Waters. All right. She may have started off in the 60s as a very concerned politician about the conditions of the Black community. But the woman is in her 80s. And you look at the areas that she has represented over the last 40 years. And then you look at where she lives. People just need to wake up and have common sense and say something's wrong here. And that's what people have done. And that's what I'm excited about. And that's why my book, I feel, will be useful because it would allow people who look like you, it'll allow you to be able to talk about these things and not get drawn into arguments about skin color, not get held to a false guilt just because of who your parents were. Be able to have conversations with people and not get into emotional tiffs with them. So, and it's going to allow Black people to have conversations among themselves and other ethnic groups and not base everything on ethnicity, but base it on character, base it on how people behave, and understand is that we all want safe neighborhoods. We all want to be able to afford housing. We all want to be able to buy food. We want to be able to save money so that we can hand things off to the next generation. And it doesn't make any difference what color you are. Those are the things that make America great. This idea of electing certain individuals because they look a certain way, that does not help us as a country. That helps those individuals, but it doesn't help us as a country. And that's what we have to be able to do is recognize that we have to recruit individuals who want to get in politics because they want to be servant leaders and not elitists. Because when these individuals who really want to make a difference come into politics and it becomes so dirty, they're like, huh, I don't want any part of this. I'll go back to my little community. I'll run my business. I'll just focus on my family. Okay. So what do? You open it up for individuals who are exploiters, individuals who are going to take advantage of the situation because they know they're not going to be held accountable, or at least they're going to be able to get away with it for 20 years. And then once they get caught, then they're going to cry sexism, racism, blah, 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 blah. But I think if we get individuals, who stood up, like say those black males who voted for Trump, they saw 20 years of Obama, post-Obama, where masculinity was devalued and almost demonized. Mm-hmm. And when you start talking to a male, grown male, and he has a prospect of his daughter going to the bathroom and there's another male in that bathroom, the male in that male is going to come out. I don't care what color they are. That's his daughter in that bathroom. And I think the left, progressive, have done so much of that individuals said, color be damned. This is hitting me where I live right now. And I'm not going to allow this to happen. So when they allowed these individuals, say, for instance, Chris, you probably have friends that are gay, but they're not about this transgender stuff.
Oh, yeah. They've told me that I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah. So every time
something story hour.
Yeah, every time something came up that was a little more perverted, they attached it to the bisexual, gay, and lesbian group. And those individuals saying, wait, whoa, 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 where all these other letters come from? I'm not about all that other stuff over there. But this is what Marxism does. It starts off with individual groups and starts adding other groups, and then it pits groups against each one another. And then we have what we have today. And then those individuals who are in power, who are stealing our money left and right, and that's what we see with Doge, don't we? We see all this money, we see all this waste, we see all this fraud. And it's like, no wonder we run deficits every year. No wonder city run deficits, because nobody's paying attention to where the money's going. So that is something that is starting to occur that I'm excited about, because now agencies have to give an account. When they do an audit, people are going to be looking at that audit now. Just like if you get audited, they're going to pull out all your records, right? So people who run these agencies, they are to get audited too. And the governmental agencies are supposed to look at them. You're going to hold them accountable and be able to say, hey, your area of responsibility was to keep your eye on the Public Service Commission. So the Public Service Commission is doing stuff over the last 20 years that's not right. Somebody's responsible for that over them. Hold people's feet to the fire. Then when you complain about something, you can do something about it. But if we just complain about stuff, it'll be the same stuff that our grandchildren are going to complain about. And at some point, a generation of people have to put their foot down, just like those individuals said, we're tired of being under the British crown. And that
just come on quick. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And that is the spirit of America.
Just a couple more quick questions here for you, because I've kept you for over an hour. First, I want to say this, when you talk about the trans stuff, I don't even know how it got to where they was participating with females in any kind of sports. Because I touched my other day, I was like, if I had a daughter and some guy got in there to wrestle her, I said, you'd hear all about it. You might hear about it on CNN. You might hear about it on social media, but you'd hear about it.
You said he would have to wrestle daddy, right?
Yeah, I mean, even if I was there, it wasn't my kid, man. We'd have a problem with that.
Yeah.
As a black man, how did you feel when Obama, went out there with his $500 shirt and $1,000 shoes, and he was talking down to black men about not voting for Kamala? I mean, how did that set with you?
Well, that has a long history back when he first was elected president. No one comes out of Chicago politics just out of the blue.
Right.
So when you look at how he came out of Chicago, I knew right off the bat he was going to be bought, because you just don't come through Chicago politics and not have individuals that control the Chicago machine pushing you through. So I knew that he was somewhat of a Manchurian candidate coming up.
Exactly.
And then it proved itself out because once he got in, he didn't get along with the NAACP because those individuals still had individuals who were veterans of the civil rights movement. And they saw this young guy come through who, was raised in Hawaii, who went to private school. They're like, this dude hadn't paid his dues.
Right.
How is he getting pushed ahead as the answer? So there was great conflict initially between him and the NAACP and the Urban League and all these other previous generation blacks in the leadership. What slowly began to happen, though, you started having those individuals get bought off. You had the Clyburns, you had the Maxine Waters, you had the lady from Texas who passed away, Sheila Jackson. You had these individuals started getting money from people like Soros to push their candidacies forward so they can continue to be elected and be elected and be elected. So when you talk about selling out your community, those were the sellouts, because those were the individuals that were taking money, and then when they saw stuff, they just kept their mouth quiet. So when Biden would say stupid stuff like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, these individuals in the party should have pulled him to the side and said, wait a minute, this is where we draw the line. You don't make statements like that. But what they do, they made excuses for him. Oh, that's just Joe. That's just Joe being Joe. So when I saw Obama doing that, I never thought he was genuine to begin with. And it really showed up when he's talking to these young men about basically scolding them.
Yeah.
All right. And then telling them, you don't want my wife to come out here and speak to you. Now, if that's not an insult, I don't know what is an insult. Here it is. You're going to come across like we're having a man-to-man talk. And then you're going to say, you don't want my wife to come out here and talk to you. So that's putting these grown men, these young men, back into their adolescence, and their mama's going to come and set them straight. That's an insult. But he is such an elitist, he didn't see that. So instead of going to those individuals and listening to what they were saying, he goes and talks to them and talks down upon him. And Obama has the ability to be able to change his accent when he's talking to different groups of people. But when you're in that group of people, fakeness when you see it. So if you have someone say where you're from Etowah County originally? Blunt, okay. So
right beside Etowah.
Okay, so say you have someone who comes from the north, his family moves down here because they start a business. All right. And then he goes around town. He's going to run for county something. And he goes around town and he starts trying to talk like people from Blount County. Well, when you're from Blount, this guy is being a fake. You're telling him, say, dude, just be yourself. Stop trying to be something else to appeal to us on a cultural or ethnic basis. Appeal to us as Americans. So that's what you're starting to see with some of these quote unquote younger progressives who are all in trouble right now. Like a lot of these females, Fannie Willis, the woman up in New York, the woman in Dalton, Illinois. These individuals, they get on television and they try to sound so angry and so street-like, but it's so fake. Nobody's buying it.
Yeah, the vice president tried to do that. When I was listening to her speak in front of these crowds in Georgia, when she's talking about the collard greens, I was like, did she really just say that? I was like, she's talking to some black Southern people, and I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe, cooked them in the bathtub, and
even the white Southern people knew something about collard greens. No,
yeah, we used to have them all. Yeah, I knew when she said that. It was like, yeah, that ain't how you cook fixed collard greens, man.
So
you're speaking about Obama a while ago.
Yeah.
When he was running the first time, and I'd listen go speak to different groups. It was like, he's trying to, I guess act black would be the way to say it. And I was like, how are you relating to these blacks that grew up, in the civil rights and, like you said, put in their dues, and y'all have nothing in common.
Yeah, and that's why Bill Clinton could identify, because Bill Clinton he could laugh at himself. He had a Southern, draw to him. Um, um, he felt comfortable with hanging out in jazz clubs and blues clubs.
Yeah.
So when he spoke about that kind of stuff, people believed him. But the problem was his second term, he became more like Hillary.
Yeah.
And people called him out on that, especially here in the South, uh, because you had so many people changing parties at that particular time. When I moved to Huntsville, Alabama in '89 of March of '89, you had Democrats in this town who were more conservative than Republicans from St. Louis.
Yeah.
But once Clinton started moving more toward Hillary, you had those individuals saying, "Hey, I can't go in that direction." So
Hmm.
so in your lifetime, you saw this, right?
Yeah. Like there's a place, I got a placard, a picture of me holding up a Clinton Gore sign from 92. And, I was all in on Bill Clinton. So yeah, in my own personal experiences, I went from being raised a Democrat to being, I don't identify with anything that happened today.
Right, and you saw that happen with um, like Hal Heflin.
I'll
Um,
have to.
you saw these individuals who were conservative Democrats saying some of this social engineering that the Democrats are doing right now, I can't go in that direction. They're anti God, anti religious plank that they try to actually put into their plank at one of their conventions in the '80s. Southerns are like, what is up with that?
Hmm.
So the different influences that came. So in history, you have groups of individuals that made decisions based on character, and they weren't just based on, well, I'm going to vote this way because my grandpa voted this way. We're starting to hold people accountable for their policies, for their planks, and saying, okay, is this good for America or is this bad news for America? And that's the thing I am encouraged by, and I want to be able to speak to these young people who are being manipulated by these entertainers, by these individuals who they talk about how much they hate Trump, but I guarantee you, in the background, they want to know who Trump's tax accountant is.
Yeah.
So these individuals, these millionaire entertainers, they're not going out of their way to pay more taxes. They're trying to avoid taxes, which is the same thing somebody who makes very little money is trying to do. Why? Because nobody just wants to give away their money to be wasted.
You know, um, it's funny when you talk about the people that talk about they hate Trump. When you pin them down and ask them, why do you hate him so much? They can't give you an answer. Or if they do that, oh, he's a racist. Okay, how's he racist? He's a sexist. How's he a sexist? I mean, look at all the women that's surrounding him. I mean, he's got strong women everywhere. This man, well, he's anti-gay. The Treasury Secretary is gay. In his first term, he appointed the first openly gay cabinet member. Okay, how, and you just, but that would leave befuddled.
Yeah, they're reading a script. Unfortunately, the media was exposed, and that's why all this stuff that I say matters is that you hold the people accountable for what they said. You keep receipts. When someone says something in 2022 and they turn around in 2024 and they're saying something totally opposite, you say, hold on, hold on. What did you mean back here in 2022 when you said this? All right. So you begin to see people for who they really are. And that's what I'm just excited about is that people are starting to have conversations. They're having face-to-face conversations instead of just um, over social media. And they're respecting individuals, even though they may disagree with them on certain things. But they begin to find that they actually have more in common with individuals than they don't have in common because there's basic things as Americans that we all desire. And Chris, I think one of the things that's going to happen is that one of the things that's going to save this country from imploding is going to be immigrants who have come here and they've left other areas where they see some of the socialism stuff propping up here in the United States. These are
Yeah.
the individuals that says, look, I risked my life to come here because I left an area that when they started talking like that, it turned into something else. It turned into something else. And then my country became unlivable. That's why I came to the United States. And I think it's going to be those individuals who stand up and say, okay, this is why I came here. So you have these little rich kids who are talking about the Palestinians this and the Palestinians that. It's going to have to come down some people who are from Gaza, who are here, who are standing up and say, hey, you guys need to shut up. There's a reason why I'm here and I'm not in Lebanon, or I'm not in Oman, or whatever these other countries are. I wanted to come here because this was a country that wasn't run by family members. That wasn't run by a ruling class or a religious leader. You actually have elections here. I'm concerned about fair elections because I left a place where there was unfair elections. So I think those individuals standing up and speaking and sitting down some of these individuals who were, you know, burning up the flag and doing all types of bad things in the United States, and being able to say, hey, I can give you a one-way ticket to Venezuela. If you think life is all great about Venezuelans and you want to come to our aid and you think America is bad, go to Venezuela for 2 days. Go to these other countries that we came from. And if you get back in the United States, you won't be burning the flag anymore.
Do you know Derek Chin?
No.
He's running for state auditor, and he's a first generation Chinese American. His grandfather fought in General Chiang Shek's army against the communists. So his story that he tells about, I mean, I think it's really, I think he's going to win because it was really resonate with people that he knows the evils of communism, what it's like for his family to fight against it. And his family came to America the right way, immigrated here.
What is he running for?
State auditor.
Oh, okay. All right.
So this is, resonates with him that, this illegal immigrant stuff and them jumping to the line. So, he's got a really powerful message. And like I said, this is the Republican version of DEI.
Right. Right.
So one more question for you. What was the most challenging thing about writing a book?
Time management. I like writing, but I'm not very good at grammar.
I'm not either. Thank God for AI.
So being able to have something and then have an editor look at it and have red lines all over the page, that's something that was very because it's humbling, because what they're doing is making what you're talking about more readable. So you have to have some humility and be able to say, okay, you're right. I did say that 5 times in one paragraph.
To make it more concise.
Yeah, make it more concise and make it more readable, because you don't want to write a book just because you want to write a book and you want it to sit on the shelf. You want people to read it. So being able to humble myself and allow those individuals who are good at editing, who are good at layout, who are good at the business of the book to do their job and not feel like, my ideas are being stripped away because they are eliminating things. So that was very tough for me. The time management, having the energy to write after I get off of work, and then also understanding that your message of your book needs to be concise so that when people get through reading it, you've given them action points so they actually can go do something now. Because as I was writing this book and slowly seeing it get longer and longer than what I intended to, I realized that there may be other books that I also can write in the future. So one book is that book that I showed you called Meditations from the Cabin. And it is basically a devotional book. From reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, and I picture the characters in Uncle Tom's Cabin having a message that the author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, wanted to convey that can be relevant for people today. So in a particular chapter of a devotion I call When God Doesn't Make Sense. And it's a section where Uncle Tom is just about to get freed, and then the guy who's going to free him suddenly died. And the plantation had to be liquidated, and then he was sold to another slave owner who was very evil. So that's an instance where what's happening to you in your life doesn't make sense. What do you do with that? Well, so I've gone through and I've come up with 40 different devotions to kind of help people navigate things that they're dealing with in their life that are prevalent in Uncle Tom's Cabin. So that's one of the things I hope that individuals do, is that they would read Uncle Tom's Cabin, because the things that Harriet Beecher Stowe was dealing with in the 1850s, as far as division in the United States, it's present today. And her writing that book, we're bringing individuals from different areas of society who knew slavery had to end, and lending their talents in whatever area they're in, whether they be the pulpit, whether it be the press, whether it be in the public sector, or whether it be in politics. You had all these different groups coming together and saying, okay, this is what I can do. This is what I can do. And Harriet Beecher Stowe came from a very talented, charismatic family. And she was a good writer as a young person. So her idea is that, what can I do? I'm going to write. Now get the picture. 1850s, a white woman writing about politics usually didn't go over well, because
Nope.
white women during those particular times, if they wrote something that was going to be outside the kitchen, so to speak, in the home, they used a pen name. They oftentimes used initials, or they used a male's name. But the fact that she wrote something that was going to be so controversial at the time, but she used her name because she couldn't hide behind her name, because her family was famous at the time. Her dad was like the Billy Graham of the 1850s.
Ah, okay.
Lyman Beecher, who was her dad, very outspoken in the area of abolitionists. She had brothers and sisters who were very involved in abolitionists and the women's suffrage movement. So she couldn't hide behind her name. But with that said, individuals who normally would not have read her book read her book. And it changed people's ideas about slavery, because she's basically writing to the North. She wasn't really writing to Southern people because it was banned in the South. She was writing to people who lived in the free areas of the North, because even though many of them were against slavery, it was out of sight, not of mind. They just saw it as a Southern problem. It's like, you Southerners need to get your crap together. But what she wanted to be able to show them is that if people in the North had stopped buying products that were being made with slaved hands, slavery would end in a day. Because if you can't make a profit in slavery, you're going to get out of the business.
So are both your books available now?
Yes, so both books are available. One, Who Kidnapped Uncle Tom and Why It Matters, is available, and Meditations from the Cabin is available.
And what's your website? Don't you have a website too?
I do have a website, but when they Google me at this particular point, if they just Google those two books, the website will come up.
Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I'll just say, I encourage individuals to start having conversations, respecting individuals who they disagree with, seek understanding as opposed to giving people a piece of your mind. Try to find out where people are coming from, a little bit about their background, a little bit about their family's background. And you begin to find that as Americans, we have a lot of things in common. And that's why people risk their life coming here.
The greatest country in the world. Dallas, thanks, my man. I'll get this uploaded soon, and I'll tag you and put it in the Facebook groups, and wish you a lot of success.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.